4th of July. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Gallagher, Lang and Riddle.
Okay. Thank you. And just for sort of the record, the apology from John Riddle is as the portfolio holder. And thank you. Disclosure of members' interest. Does anybody have any interest that they'd like to disclose?
Just to say, Chair, I'm a partner of a business that does have highways contracts with Northumberland County Council on winter maintenance and Verge Moorings. So just to declare that, but there's nothing.
There's no. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Item 3, the forward plan of cabinet decisions on pages 9 to 16. This is here for information as normal.
Nothing to add, Chair.
Nothing to add, Sean. Thank you. Item 4 is the main business of today, which is basically a presentation on the highway maintenance drainage operations. So are we going to start with Glenn, and then Glenn will pass on to Paul, and we've also got Andy Olive here as well.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm here in John Riddle's place because I thought it was important that a member of the administration was present in order to take any challenge and be able to explain where we stand on what is an increasingly expensive part of the County Council's bottom line. It's become a lot more expensive because of a number of reasons, which you all know about, which is the increased weight of traffic, the increased amount of traffic, the poor nature of many of our C and U roads, which have perhaps an inch of tarmac over an inch or two of hardcore, and that's it. So when it comes to doing proper structural patching, which we're doing much more of now, it is very much more difficult to do it on these sort of roads simply because they are old-fashioned and not fit for the kind of traffic we have in 2024. So what we have done as an administration has put more money into the front line and to tackle the defects that have been caused. What we can't do anything about is the effects of the weather. It sounds very trite to blame the weather, but we know that we have had the wettest winter since 1860 something, certainly let's say 200 years, the wettest winter. That has caused immense problems. Part of the problem has been really demonstrated, which is the inability of the drainage system on our roads to cope with the kind of flooding that we've had. Now, we're not alone in this. Anyone that travels around will know that there is exactly the same issues in every other large county council, whichever one you visit, that has experienced the level of rainfall that we have. So that makes it exceptionally difficult to deal with. So what we have done this year, just recently, we have agreed to take a significant amount of money and ring fence that for gullies and drainage, full stop. That is coming from our winter reserve, which we would normally carry over, but we are actually using it now, and we will extend that amount of money into next year. So our plans will show that we're doing this on an annual basis for at least the next 2 years. That is a very serious amount of money that we are investing simply in that particular part of our business. But it's one we have to, given climate change, which we know is an issue, and the kind of weather that we've experienced, whether it's the amount of rain that we had this winter or the amount of wind that we had during Arwen that caused huge, expensive problems around landslips in particular. And even today, just down the road from here at Mitford, you will see there's another landslip that has been probably caused by the flooding this winter, that the levels of that river not having seen before. So that's the situation. Now, one of the good things is, apart from us pledging this money for drainage and gullies, is that we were promised by the government, the previous government, £184 million between 2023 and 2034. That's a lot of money to be pledged to come to Northumberland to add to our roads budget. We obviously hope that the new government will clearly stick to that, but that's a significant amount of new money on top of the normal settlements that we get from government. And in addition to that, as you know, we put more money this year into our roads budget to get on top of the issues that we have. So I'm going to pass over to, we've got Andy, the excellent Andy Oliver, who you will know, those of you that live out in the West. No man better as a highways inspector. Is that okay? Yes, okay. And then Simon, you know, and then of course Paul. So if I hand over to them, but I think the key message I would like to say is that we have had exceptionally difficult weather conditions. We are investing as heavily as we possibly can in money over and above that we currently have allocated, and we are now finding extra money to deal with gullies and drainage, the deficiencies of which we saw over the winter, and we will carry that spending through into next year as well. Okay.
So what we're going to cover this morning is just covering off initially our legal framework, so it's clear. So it's clear what our obligations are, as well as our powers. Look at the staff and resource available to us and the budgets, how the service is currently performing, some of the current management systems we use and how those are evolving, and the investment that's been made in those. Obviously, the operational challenges that come with maintaining a highway, the nature of Northumberland, and how that's been impacted by the recent weather events, and then fundamentally what improvement actions have been taken going forward to try and address some of these issues. Some of them are clearly longer term and not just in terms of the winter. So in terms of the statutory duty, all comes as you would expect under the Highways Act 1980. So the first one's just a general kind of obligation to maintain the highway. So that covers everything in terms of the road surface, verges, the whole shebang, so to speak. More importantly, though, we also have powers under Section 100 of the Highways Act that enable us to go in and cleanse drainage systems both within the highway and on adjoining land where there's a danger to flooding of the highway. Obviously, if that's a landowner's responsibility, we'll use those powers to press the landowner to do that, but that is something that we have within our effectively power to do. We also, I think it's important to say, in addition to just that maintenance activity, highway drainage is kind of captured by some of the other wider issues associated with fundamentally water and water quality protection. So there's a raft of other legislation relating to flood risk and protecting water quality that we also have to work within and make reference to. That includes the Water Framework Directive, the Groundwater Directive and the Flood and Water Management Act. And that's fundamentally about preventing flood risk to properties and managing the water within, you know, our responsibility of the highway network, but also ensuring that we're not contaminating both groundwater, surface water systems, and that water's properly managed within the highway boundaries as well as part of that. So that's why in terms of our highway drainage system, we have kind of three key objectives as the service. It's to try and get the water off the highway as quickly and effectively as possible. You don't want standing water on the highway because that poses a significant danger to road users. It also clearly, when there's water on the highway, that can get into the cracks, into the actual structure of the highway. And obviously, as soon as that happens, if you get any freeze thaw, that can cause damage. It can also cause washout and damage down the sides of the carriageway as well, on verges and things such as that. So you want to prevent water from getting into the structure of the road system, and that's another key issue that we try and obviously address. And thirdly, it's that whole issue around managing the flood risk and the water quality. So it's those are the three key aims. We also, the picture on the right-hand slide there, is like a national best practice guide in terms of management of highway drainage assets that's been produced by the Institute of Civil Engineers. That's something that we make reference to, and that informs the work that the teams are involved in and how we actually manage the service as well. In terms of what is it that we're actually maintaining county-wide, it's effectively divvied up in terms of the 4 operational highway areas, but overall it's just short of 85,000 gullies across the 67 wards. As you can see from the next slide, you would expect most gullies to be in the urban area because that's the most densely populated. There's a lot of kind of road systems within that area. A lot of our more rural roads don't have gullies on them because they just drain off the actual edge of the carriageway. So you get a differentiation in terms of that, but fundamentally there's a lot of gullies across the county as a whole serving those purposes that I've mentioned already. In terms of other assets, because it's not all just about gullies, and I think it's important to note that we do have a range of other assets that we have to maintain within the service as well. So we do have things such as attenuation and pumping systems. These are basically where we've undertaken further improvements to the highway network, or that requires us to control the volume of water leaving the network to slow it down to prevent flood risk further down the system. So a good example of that's the new car park that's been developed in Hexham at Aylmouth Road. That contains a really significant underground attenuation system within the site itself that has an automated pumping system linked to that basically ensures during really high periods of surface water flow and rainfall, it goes into that system, it's stored and it's then pumped out into the drainage system at a much lower rate so it doesn't affect flooding in that area that would otherwise be sensitive to that. We also have sustainable urban drainage systems or SUD systems from adopted developments. We don't have that many of those at the moment, but that is something that will be increasing over time because of changes to legislation. And again, in the picture there, there's a facility in Hexham on the Corbridge, out on the Corbridge Road. It's an example of one of those systems that basically captures water, slows it down and prevents it from causing flood risk further down into the other areas and residential properties. We also, within our own highway network, look to, where possible, we work very closely with the Council's flood and coastal erosion team, that are the lead flood authority for the county, to look at areas of surface water flood risk, and if there's improvements we can make to the drainage systems on the highway to support that, we do that. A good example is in Bennett's Walk in Morpeth, where we've clearly got a really excellent Environment Agency flood defence system that protects from the main river flooding, but clearly it's not very good if you've spent £12 million to be protected from flooding from the main river, only to then be flooded by surface water off the highway that can't get into the river. So we have pumping sumps and things such as that built into the drainage system in the highway along Bennett's Walk, so that when there is very high rainfall and water starts to accumulate behind the flood defences, that water can be pumped out and safe into the river and not affecting the properties. We have lots and lots of drainage and pipework inspection chambers as part of our networks, and obviously you have lots of roadside ditches and open water courses that are within the highway boundary, and as such the responsibility of the County Council as the Highways Authority. In terms of the budget, again, it's important to split out between the revenue and capital. So on a revenue budget, which is your kind of cyclic maintenance activity and your responsive activity, we have a county-wide gully cleansing budget of just over £600,000 in the current financial year. As you can see from the slide, the breakdown of that is predominantly around salaries, and that relates to the 8 members of staff that we have on the gully tankers. The other main cost is, obviously, as you would expect, in terms of that fleet, with both the systems that we use to operate those and the disposal of waste being the other key cost areas. In terms of those current resources, we have invested recently in 4 new gully tankers. These have significantly better capacity and capability than the previous fleet that we had of 4 that were getting long in the tooth and older. So these have a full kind of jetting capacity on them. So there's high pressure jetting equipment on these. As a result of that, the staff that operate these not only have to be large goods vehicle drivers, but they also have to have a range of other specialist training in terms of the use of these high pressure jetting equipment, because it is quite dangerous equipment to use. You don't want them to get out of control if you're holding on to them, believe me. So that is something that, you know, we have 8 specialist staff that operate these vehicles. 2 of the vehicles have a slightly larger capacity in terms of the split between waste and water, because when you empty gullies, you have to top them back up with fresh water. So that's something that you have to carry around with you. So you have to make a balance between how much of the waste, how much of the tanker has waste, how much has water within that as part of the process. And we did that based on the feedback from the teams and the guidance from the teams in terms of what's going to work best for them. One of the key issues we have, and we'll touch on it later, is that because of changes in legislation, the gully tankers only have one disposal point now in the county, and that's in the southeast of the county down in Blythe. It's actually within our own Cowley Road depot. We've had to develop, as part of the licensed waste transfer station at that facility, a specialist gully waste disposal point, because there isn't anywhere else in the county due to changes in legislation. You used to be able to take this material into landfill sites, but because it's classed as a liquid waste and there's a ban on landfill disposal of liquid waste, that ended, I think it was best part of 7 years ago, and we've been taking it to a single facility ever since. In terms of the demand on the service, as you can see from the slides from data from Fix My Streets, we have had a big spike in Q4 of the previous year. That period of a really intense, heavy rainfall. We had over 3,000 reports through Fix My Streets during the May to December, but best part of 1,500 just in those 3 months alone. That is clearly a really significant amount of issues for the team to deal with, and something that's been obviously keeping them extremely busy. On a positive note, that has clearly eased as the weather has improved, but as you can see from the January to June data, that high impact continued and wasn't helped in April as well, where we had another periods of intense rainfall within the county. So overall, 2,634 reports in that period. Again, a significant level of demand on the service. In terms of things that are getting reported through Fix My Streets, the damaged drains and blocked drains was one of the most reported issues when it comes to highway drainage. Obviously, the most reported things tends to be just general maintenance issues on the highway, but in terms of drainage-related issues, it is predominantly blocked or flooded issues within the actual network itself. So best part 2,700 reports of blocked flooding footpaths or roads over that period. That involved over 350 call out of hours as part of our response to that, to deal with issues where there was obviously a danger to road users, and the teams were going out to address that, to place flood signs out and to try and relieve the water from the highway where possible to do so. So what happens in terms of Fix My Streets, because this is one of the big investments that the council has made in terms of how to better improve the management of services and the responsiveness to issues for the public and the ability of the public to report issues as well. So this is the kind of reports that the management teams within each of the highways areas get on a daily basis. So they get all of the reports in terms of blocked drains. They can then schedule the work with the teams and prioritise this, but it gives them a really positive, up-to-date and powerful tool at their disposal to manage the demand and to use best the resources they have to address the prioritisation of issues within the system. We have had a lot of reports through Fix My Streets, as I mentioned, 5,700 over that period. Of those, we have responded to the vast majority, 5,303 of those. We've got 427 still live. So we have addressed 92% of those. That involves some of those being scheduled for action, as well as actually being resolved, but they're all programmed in or fundamentally actually addressed and undertaken. And you can see from the Fix My Streets on there, we are trying to constantly improve the information that goes back and the feedback to the members of the public. So it's really helpful through that system that members of the public can actually take photographs of the specific point. They can access through the GPS system that's tied into Fix My Streets and pinpoint the exact gully that they're concerned about. In the past, that was a real issue for us because you'd have to go out and basically use a bit of guesswork. So it's a much more effective and efficient use of staff time, getting much better data, and they're able to respond to that data in a much more timely and effective manner as well. In terms of the performance of the teams and the productivity levels, so the urban gully tankers, as you would expect, can do a bit more marching, or a bit more fighting rather, and less marching. So they get on around about 75 gullies per day, about 375 gullies per week per vehicle. That means that over a 52-week, they get around just short of 20,000 gullies. So that's a very significant run rate on that. In rural areas, because they're having to travel more between locations, and obviously there's then a longer journey to the disposal point as well, they're not as productive, so they get through around about 30 per day, 150 a week, and they get through just short of 8,000 per year on average. So our target is to get around about 27,000 gullies cleared each year. The actual average at the minute is slightly below that at 24,000. We are looking at that, and basically this, in terms of the costs, equates to about £25 per gully to clean a gully. So just as a, get a bit of a feel for that. What that means, though, when you look at the overall number of gullies county-wide, it means that we have a cleansing cycle for a gully on average takes about 3 years from point to point. What I would highlight is that doesn't mean that all gullies only get cleaned only 3 times a year, because there are clearly areas within the county that we know are higher flood risk that will be getting cleaned on a lot more frequent basis, some of those on a quarterly basis, where there's particular issues and flood risk to properties. So in terms of the challenge we face, clearly you can see from that there's a lot of ad hoc reports that come in. We want to plan as much of the gully cleansing activity as part of cyclic work, so working through a programmed route. When we get lots of ad hoc reports, that disturbs those cyclic maintenance routes. We do try and program in at least part of the week to do that ad hoc work, so that we continue to do the cyclic work on top of that, but that is clearly a balance that has to be adjusted on occasion if we're getting a lot of ad hoc reports coming in that need urgent attention. On-street parking, particularly during, I think, the COVID period, was a really big issue. It continues to be an issue as we get more and more cars on the road, particularly in urban areas, in residential areas, and more people working from home, and agile working has added to that. If you've got a car parked on top of a gully, you can't clean it, fundamentally, is the issue around that. As I've mentioned, the stringent disposal arrangements on gully waste is a big issue. Even taking them into, you can't even take gully waste into a sewage treatment works without a specialist licence to do that. So it is something that you have to have a special waste management licence for. It has to have planning consent for that facility. And there's an operational cost associated with all of that, as well as having competent staff to manage that facility in its own right. So we do that as part of the waste service within the county. So the waste transfer station that incorporates this facility at Blythe also takes in all of the housing team's waste and other waste materials. It takes in a lot of our verge maintenance waste as well, and grounds maintenance waste, so it can be bulked up and disposed of elsewhere. But it's part of our waste service in effect, but it is something that we, again, is a constraint on the service in terms of just the amount of travel time associated with that. We have 8 staff members that are dedicated to the gully tankers. Each vehicle, to be fully productive and to have those high productivity levels, requires 2 staff on it, because it is still, despite all of the technology and the assistance on the vehicles, through the kit on the vehicles, it is still heavy physical manual work as well. And that is something that you require 2 people so they can switch, and they're not all just doing the lifting the grate covers and things such as that. That is an issue in terms of then the availability of those staff. If people are off on long-term absence, for example, can impact on the service. Traffic management is also an issue, because in urban areas, not so much, because you're within a 30-mile-an-hour zone, you've got your flashing lights and everything's hunky-dory on that. As soon as you get out of the 30-mile-an-hour zone, you need rolling road closures and traffic management arrangements in place to alert people to the dangers associated with having a large vehicle effectively blocking part of the highway, and for the safety of the staff and other road users as part of that. So we have to book the space as part of the process when we're doing any significant works on that. We also, a lot of our drainage systems feed into combined water systems, so some combined sewers. We're not actually responsible for the maintenance of those combined sewers, that's Northumberland Water. So anything that we want to do to improve those systems is something that we have to do through effectively liaison and consent with Northumbrian Water in terms of what we feed into those systems, because they don't want additional surface water going into combined sewer overflows, because that then creates issues for them. So we have to look at attenuation systems as part of that. Clearly, climate change has been and continues to be a big concern for us. We are getting significantly wetter weather. We're getting more severe periods of rainfall and more prolonged periods of rainfall. And as you're well aware, the amount of rain that came off surrounding land onto the highway of the last winter period in particular has caused a lot of issues for us. And whilst we're clear as to what we have within the highway network, it has to be said that the ownership and maintenance of landowner drainage systems that we tie into, many of these systems clearly have evolved with the highway network, and the accuracy of the records as to what are those systems, where do they go, where are the outfalls, is very, very patchy indeed. And it's obviously the riparian owners that are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of those systems that tie into the highway network. That is something that, you know, can cause problems as well in terms of where there's blockages and things such as that need to be tackled. What we have been doing is we undertook a review of the gully cleansing process back in 2022. So it's not something that we're not aware of. We appreciate that there are issues in terms of the work around highway drainage and trying to improve that. Previously, the gully cleansing activity, whilst it was being recorded, it wasn't being as robustly recorded on back office systems in terms of the record keeping. We didn't get as good accurate records in terms of what the actual gullies were like when they were getting cleaned, the amount of silt in them, what the actual condition of the drainage network was like. So more accurate data was needed in relation to just to support the improvement and the efficiency and productivity of the planning of the work. So we got a system called Carbon Tech that's an in-cab system as part of the vehicle fleet. That enables them the staff to locate exactly where the gullies are on the system on a digital device within the vehicle. They can record the levels of silt and what the condition of the drainage system's like when they're doing that. So that enables us to better programme when next they need to come back, because we're understanding how quickly those gullies themselves are actually filling up and require work. That enables us to look at the phasing of activity and the planning of routes much more effectively to plan the cleansing activity. And it also enables us to effectively defend claims and activity in terms of any issues that occur on the highway, because we have much better digitised systems now for the recording of the maintenance activity that we undertake. One of the more recent developments is basically taking that Carbon Tech data and putting it into the Alloy back office system that we use for all of our highway records. And the staff now are able, with that Alloy data, to take those photographs kind of before and after inspection information. So it's a much more powerful, again, volume of data that we're getting that we can actually then use to further improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the service. As part of the work that's ongoing at the moment, we are working with our flood and coastal erosion team to map and define high-risk areas, particularly around surface water flooding problems. And this is something that's ongoing and, you know, continues to be updated as and when we get further issues identified to us. And what happens on these is that where we know there's going to be a particular heavy rainfall event, for example, the teams will go out in advance of that heavy rainfall event and check the systems in those areas. And if there is gullies that require attention, we'll get them cleansed so that the system we know is effectively fully operational and help them to tackle any surface water flooding and risk to property in those locations. As you can see from the images on the next slide, the storm Babette and Aisha this year caused a whole host of problems. Some of the roads effectively did look like rivers rather than roads. There was lots and lots of overland flows, basically private drainage systems, the land completely saturated. And that has caused a lot of issues for us both then, but also ongoing issues in terms of the amount of detritus and debris that's being washed into drainage systems across the county. That is something that the teams are actively on with, but it is something that we are getting support to tackle as well. In terms of the capital side of drainage activity, when we set the LTP this year, we always have funding allocated to drainage activity within the general maintenance allocations within each area office. We actually put in in addition to that, a specific £805,000 capital funding in the current financial year, specifically around drainage activity, given the impacts that we had over the network. You can see from the diagrams there, part of that is improvement work as well, where we're looking to upscale some of the drainage systems, so we're getting the water off the highway. They've got greater capacity, they can deal with greater flows that are coming into some of those problematic areas. So we're managing that in a more effective way. As part of the general highway maintenance capital programme, where we are doing the surface, relane road surfaces, we do also adopt what we call a hedge-to-hedge approach. So where we resurface in a section of road or doing works to a section of road, when the traffic management's in place on that, we will get in and basically do everything that's needed to resolve any issues on that section of highway. So that will include cutting back hedges, cutting back any overhanging trees, clearing ditches, addressing cleansing gullies, anything that needs doing within that road closure basically gets done as part of that capital scheme. We also have got 2.78 million of additional DFT funds that came through as part of what Glenn mentioned, of this big uplift in the 10 years from 2023 to 2034. The first two batches of that were 2.78 million in last year and this year. Last year, the 2.78 million was used specifically around dealing with a lot of the issues from the storms and addressing the drainage systems as part of that. And the detail of the schemes that were being supported through that are actually available on the council's webpage if you want to get into the detail of where that money was spent. As I mentioned, we work very closely with the flood and coastal erosion team to look at that, and where we can secure external funding through other measures, so things such as, you know, looking at property resilience and protecting properties from flood risk. Some of those flood risk protection schemes actually support the highway network as well. So we've got a range of schemes that have got funding in the flood and coastal erosion management, using Morpeth as an example, that are addressing highway drainage issues near Clifton and also along the areas towards Hepscott, where they're getting surface water flooding problems along there that are basically along the river and the stream catchments that are basically attenuating the water there that will stop it from flooding onto the highway as part of the benefits of those schemes. In terms of additional support used during 2023, whilst we have our own, obviously, as we've identified, in-house teams, we do also use subcontractors to support that when needed. Some of that subcontract work is used particularly around the capital programme, where we're doing that hedge-to-hedge clearance activity. So we use companies like Aim Range, Pipe Tech and Quick Flow that are the big, really big gully tanker type vehicles that go in and cleanse through drainage systems with high pressure jetting and the like. We also use those companies if needed to support during storm events. So if there's additional capacity that's required at very short notice, we have contractual arrangements to bring them in at short notice to support our response to those severe weather events and assist where needed. Clearly, one of the issues around highway drainage is making sure that the channels are kept clean as possible, because obviously any waste and detritus, leaves, soil and grit that runs off adjacent fields that ends up in the channels or the gutters. Ultimately, that will wash into the gullies if it's not actually mechanically swept and removed. So we have a fleet of 15 big, or rather 5 16-ton large mechanical road sweepers that are operated by the neighbourhood services teams. Those are located across the county. They sweep the channels, the gutters in the urban areas, they remove the detritus, and they support the highway drainage system. We aim to sweep those channels in urban areas 3 times a year. We also have a further 16 medium and small sweepers. Those are primarily used in urban areas and settlements to sweep pedestrianised areas and footways, to clear them of litter, detritus and leaves. But the larger ones, in terms of the medium size, are used to clean channels. So you will see the larger, albeit midi sweepers, cleaning channels in urban areas on a regular basis, particularly around high leaf fall periods. And the performance of the sweepers is part of the council's BEST programme, looking at that as a part of our cleansing arrangements as to how we can get better effectiveness out of that as well to support that activity. So in terms of looking at the improvement actions and next steps, we are looking at further significant in-year investment to, as Glenn mentioned, to address highway drainage issues following the severe weather. We are looking to bolster our existing in-house teams with some contractors in each area to cover both additional cleansing of the channels, so large mechanical sweepers, additional gully tankers to clear a lot of the gullies that are still causing us concern, because we know we're not going to get around them if we don't get that additional resource in, and also to get some of the concerns around roadside ditches cleared ahead of the oncoming winter period. So that's something that we're on with at the moment. We are also looking at that storm data. We've got obviously lots and lots of data in terms of where the issues occurred on the network during the last winter. So we're prioritising where those responses are going in relation to the problem areas. We are looking to review and update our approach to drainage as part of the TAMP in terms of the allocation of funding to that, and also to as part of that, to look at the disposal point for disposal of the gully waste. There is some opportunities. It is expensive to set up these facilities, but we are looking at some of the other quarry operators in Northumberland in particular to see if there's an opportunity there to tie into some of those facilities that are already within those sites, so we can provide effectively better performance of our own existing fleet of gully tankers. There's a lot of work going on. We're working very closely with Carbon Tech and Alloy to look at our existing data and how we can effectively make best use of that data as well. And I'm sure if you want to quiz Andy, he's got some information around some of the work that's been undertaken on that. That's in particular looking at gullies that are visited on multiple occasions and those high-risk areas, so that we're keeping on top of those. We are looking at a new operational handbook as well, and there is some guidance documents that have been working on for a while now that are actually finalised and getting them printed off, so we're hoping that you get some copies actually for the meeting today that set out what the responsibilities are for landowners in terms of, and property owners in relation to vegetation management, so trees, verges and the like, that impacts clearly the highway, as well as the drainage obligations that set out the respective obligations of landowners, the county councils, the highways authority, and also the environment agency and the water companies, so that there's clarity, and those will be all published online effectively as of today. We'll get those up on the internet today. One of the things that we have also been discussing with our town and parish council colleagues is where there is a desire for volunteering activity. We get a lot of people that volunteer doing litter picking activity. We are looking to, and have done so for a while now, encouraging town and parish councils to, if they want to get more involved in some of the low-level maintenance within 30-mile-an-hour areas, within urban areas, to look at things like the cleaning signs, like if there's dirt covering the top of a gully, to clear that. It's something that we're more than happy to have dialogue around. There's some of that low-level activity that isn't necessarily a high priority for us, that helps keep an area clean and tidy and looking better maintained, but also helps to prevent some of the issues longer term as well. So that's something that we're more than happy to have further dialogue with town and parish councils over as part of the work that's ongoing at the moment. These are the two documents that I mentioned that we've been working on for a while now, that have now completed and will be going out to landowners around those responsibilities. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Paul. That was very comprehensive, very detailed. Does anybody have questions? Right, okay. Eileen, we'll start with you, and Gordon.
Just a quick one. You mentioned that you got rid of the wastewater at Blythe, right, from the gullies and that. I know that bit's rubbish. And you said you disposed of it, but where do you dispose of it to from Blythe?
So basically the system you have for gully tanker waste, because it's effectively is a liquid waste, it's dirty water and solid materials in that water. So some of them are in suspension, some of them settle out within the tank itself. So all of that material, the back of those big gully tankers, if you imagine it's just like a big flask, the back lifts up, it tips up, and all that material drops out. All of the water, all of that material, the water as well as the solid material, all slops out into a contained area. The water filters through. There's like a settlement tank arrangement within the setup there. The foul water from that goes into the main sewer, and the solid materials that settle out are disposed of to landfill as basically as solid waste.
Just didn't know if you had some kind of filter system like they have from the main workings, because they've got like,
No,
you know, like
it's,
the
it is purely just, it's dirty water and then solid materials, so it settles out quite quickly, and the liquids go into the sewers, the solids get picked out. What we are looking at is potential for reed bed systems in some of those other locations. Yeah,
It's
where,
really
where there isn't that connection to the main sewer, that we can potentially look at as having the treatment effectively on site.
Because there is a treatment site at Blythe, and I've been on it, and actually it's really, really impressive. It's just on the bait side, just beside your building, right?
Yeah.
And it's all filter-rated systems, and it's really good.
Mine water's a different beast altogether. Yeah.
Can I just ask another question about the verges, right? Now, you've just answered one of the things, because I wasn't sure whether the council would be responsible for nearly all of the verges in Northumberland, but I noticed in your speech some of the verges are responsible of landowners. Is there a way you could look at not cutting back as many verges, right? Because I'm going to be honest with you, there was a verge cut in Blythe the other day. I had gone along the night before, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was all colour, it was different plants, it was quite long, and it looked stunning. The next night I drove along, and it had all been cut back, and it looked absolutely dreadful, right? Now, right, I think it would have been better left the way it was.
Verges. Conservation verges.
Do you want to?
Yeah. So may I on that particular point about grass cutting? We have a duty to prevent cow slips and things flowing over onto the road.
Right.
They have to be cut back. The question is when. And it is our wish to try and let the flowering go on as long as possible. But we do have quite a strong lobby from cyclists who complain if there's any kind of ingress of weeds. So it's it's one of those things where you can't please everybody, so you have to try and find the best compromise. But we also have conservation verges in many places, I'm sure in Andy's area as well, where we either don't cut the verges at all, or we cut them very late in the season. And we are always happy to talk to parish councils if there are specific areas they want left. And so that's what we do. So it's that keeping that balance of what we have to do against making sure we allow the wildflowers to come to seed. And it is a battle sometimes, isn't it, Andy? But I think it's the conservation versions is certainly something that you could look at, and we would, if we feel we can do that, we will leave longer. If that helps.
Thank you. I think, Gordon, you were next.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned, Paul, the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Team. I can never remember the name, I've written it down. I chair the Northumberland Local Area Council, and in September, the only item on the agenda, really, is to do with the flooding in Alnmouth in April, where part of one of the greens was actually removed. Now, I've never picked a golf club in my life, so I'm no conflict here. But it's very important. But also, it got very close to the properties. And the meeting that's being organised, a residents group has been set up, including business people in Alnmouth, and they've organised this presentation, and they're developing a long-term plan. And in September at this meeting, I expect a big turnout from Alnmouth residents and businesses, and I'm wondering, linked to the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Team, external funds, etc., it'd be very good if I had an officer able to come to that meeting and join in the discussions. And it might even be necessary or advisable to have a chat with the team beforehand, before the meeting. Is that something I should take up directly with you or beforehand? It's of some importance because our roads are quite exposed, not just the green.
I'm aware of that. It's not connected to the highway. It's,
No,
yeah, it's
but
part
it's
of the golf
flooding,
course,
isn't
but
it? Yeah, it's
close
flood
to the
risk.
road, yeah.
And it could well be the highways that are affected directly nearer the coast there. So I'll come directly on this one if I may. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anne, you were next.
I could be very about my own area, but I'm not, because I actually think it's a bigger picture, this. And first of all, could I ask Councillor Sanderson, the figures you gave at the beginning, which the government's, could you let everybody have those? Because I'm quite happy to go out and lobby the present new government to ensure that we have that amount of money. So if I could have those figures in writing, please, and then I've got them and I can do some work on that by starting to lobby. I would want to bring one or two things, and I think I'm looking at this, not only this document, but also the previous document, because actually they all work together. So one of the things that I think all of us have had, we've had challenges, and there have been a lot of challenges due to climate change, which has brought enormous amount of flooding. And specifically in areas where you've got hills, etc., it's been more difficult, it's very challenging. I've got all my ward is down a hill side with coal mines, you name it, everything. And everything runs down. So consequently, I've got farmland at the top, all the farmland, mud, everything else walks, and it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult for the actual officers to manage, because it doesn't happen every 3 years, it happens every week. So it is very, very hard for them to manage that. I do have concerns about using ring fence reserves, because actually I'm looking at the staffing and the resources, staffing resources of the work that has to be undertaken. And I think we should be looking to put this in our budget and add it to the annual budget, not use of reserves. Because if you look at the challenges that these officers have, and can I say they are all excellent, but the challenge they have, the amount of work they have, is considerable. And over and above what I would expect any officer to have to manage. And I've written to Simon in the past about my problems, and I think probably lots of other people have. But you've got the work of an average inspector per month. It is vast. We also have all the challenges coming off with and the joint sewers, water combined sewers, where we're working with NWL. In some places, they're all breaking down, they've got problems, they're all, a lot of them, where there's trees and things, roots are going in, it backs onto the gullies, etc. The whole picture is far bigger than actually saying we're going to put reserves in. And if you look at the gully cleaner, or LGV drivers, in our area, the same people manage the road gritting. If there's any illness, they also do refuse collection. So every time they're doing this, they're actually taken off, so they miss days and things, and the lost days are quite large in the winter. So the thing is that rather than sit here and say, I think it's a great report, I think it gives us all the information we need, but it's an enormous piece of work that needs to be undertaken. Now, I gather Best has been in and are doing a piece of work. It means everybody working together. For instance, the booklet on the responsibilities for landowners was brought in 2016, 15, 16, which I worked on then. And it really is quite a sort of, everybody has to have a responsibility. But the county council also has to have the responsibility for not putting water onto landowners and causing them bursts and things, which has happened in my ward. I have to say the flood resilience working group, the flood resilience people are brilliant. and I'm consistently working with them all the time. They were out yesterday, more flooding. They're out last week. We've got other flooding issues. The highways people are dealing with flooding issues into houses. This isn't just flooding, it's flooding into people's houses. So what I would like to ask is that we look further, and this is a report because I think we need to do this, but look further in consolidating all the reports we've got. Look at the resources we have, staffing resources available. Look at the extra budget that is required. I mean, you're talking about, you've got another 4,000 gullies you don't clean each year because they can't get round. That's a big cost. I can see that there. I've added it up, and that's, you know, you're talking about a lot of money. It needs to be all consolidated together. And let us have a look at the actual staffing resources available to do this work. And I'm sure this council would support a revenue increase in that budget heading, because it's not going to improve, it's going to get worse.
Okay.
And I think the staff have done a brilliant job, but we need more resources.
Yeah, great, thank you. So can I just sort of add to that, so that I don't ask a similar question twice, because that was two of the points that Councillor Dale has just raised with two of the points that I had noted down. So Councillor Dale was saying, can we not increase the revenue budget? You've talked about the £2.7 million of extra money that's coming in. That's going into sort of capital repairs. We've got a 600k revenue budget for gully cleaning. I imagine there's probably a similar amount for road sweeping and as part of the neighbourhood services team. Both of those things impact on our gullies and on our roads. We've got 4 gully wagons. So in terms of, in a sort of spirit of actually sort of moving things on and actually coming up with sort of, you know, because what part of the role of this committee is to come up with recommendations. Councillor Dale's made the point is, could we look at the increasing the resource? If we were to increase the resource from 4 gully wagons, which cost 600k, well, that's staffing and presumably the MRP costs on the capex, if we increase that to 6 gully wagons, that would cost us another £300,000 a year. And as a percentage of a council that has an £800 million a year budget, it's not a lot of money, but it might make a significant, it might bring that 3-year cycle down to a 2-year cycle, which might then start getting on top of some of the sort of the longer term problems that are caused by having a 3-year cycle. So there's a sort of just basically adding to the bones of what Councillor Dale said. And then the other point that Councillor Dale mentioned was about landowners. We've got the document, which we've seen the title page 2 on the presentation. That's about to be published. But my question is, do we have the resource and the will to actually enforce that? You know, I mentioned in the pre-meeting I was walking along a path yesterday where I had to step out onto the road twice because a landowner had allowed his trees to basically go right out across the path, and that's happened over a period of probably 4 or 5 years, I imagine. So it's that question. So do we have the resource, and then could we look at the revenue budget for the actual maintenance?
Because I think it's important, our insurance claims, highways insurance claims, within 5-6 months, we had about nearly 400. Now, if we're looking at value for money, if we are going to actually make our roads safer, less potholes, etc., that should bring down the number of claims we have. So it just, I think we need to look at the whole picture together. What actually are we funding? You know, we've got insurance claims which are large, and the officers have to deal with those. So that's all, the whole thing needs to be taken into account.
If I may, can I just begin, and then I'll let Paul answer the detailed questions. On the point, on your first point, Councillor Dale, around the money, Paul, are you going to send the link to the Department of Transport?
I've already sent it to you, Councillor Dale. I've emailed it to you, the link to the DFT. I've sent you the link via email while you were talking to the DFT document that details the 2024 to 2034 allocations of funding.
the 184 million. So that's in that government document.
That's over
Yeah.
10 years.
So on the other point about finding more money for our roads, as I said right at the beginning, Chairman, this is becoming a more and more expensive part of our spending for all sorts of reasons, not least the effects of the weather and Arwen and so on. But the problem we have is that we also have, for example, adult social care and extra care children care that are cared for, and SEND pupils. And I will be telling Council soon about what that is actually costing us every year, net of any government or external funding that we get. And the average increased cost over every year will startle you. So we have that, and there is no clear guidance anywhere from anyone to say, we will help you. So we have got to find millions more every year. And as Councillor Dale will probably know, at the Cabinet meeting 10 days ago, we agreed to find an extra 2.7 million as a stopgap measure just for this financial year, just to get us over and above that figure. So we have pressures, frankly, on all sides. There's no question about it. On the roads, I'm always very willing to talk about putting more money into roads, and that's why we have put in, 10 million extra altogether? So we put in 10 million extra altogether for this year alone, and that's coming from our own resources. And that's a lot of money to find. I give great credit to our staff who work very well, and as a team, we are getting there. But to find more money will not be easy. Having said that, I'm always happy to listen, but if there is a case that can be made, we will do that. But using this extra money on drains and gullies alone will put the spotlight very much more on, won't it? Simon will help you, very much more on dealing with the immediate problem quickly. And as I say, I'm wanting to carry that through into next year as well, so that we address drainage and gullies in the same way next year as a separate project, treating it as something that has to be an integral part of the whole of our delivery on our roads.
Simon, could you, when you respond, could you just sort of address the just for the benefit of the committee, the sort of difference between the revenue and the capital? Yep. Because my sort of theory, and I may be completely wrong, is that if we spend a little bit more on revenue, on regular maintenance, and if we made that part of our core budget, then we would necessarily spend less on capital and repairs and dealing with potholes and insurance claims and so on, and that there may be a sort of invest to save argument that would actually allow us to increase the revenue budgets. We would spend less on capital and capital interest costs and so on in the longer term.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. So if we go back to that DFT forward programme of money, that's important for two particular reasons. One, whatever the number there is, it gives us a long-term pipeline of money we can rely upon. And I think that is important in budget setting over a medium term rather than year by year for us to scale up, because at 1 year it almost doubles the work that is needed. So we need that certainty to scale up appropriately, either with our own resources or using contractors to support that work. So with that in mind, one of the features of our budget preparation, I know there's a budget policy conference this afternoon for members, for example, is to look at in the round, how does that money best address the council's priorities. So for example, on that point, Chair, on invest to save, we experimented, didn't we, with structural patching as a trial last year to get some real life evidence that we could then make decisions upon, and that has informed structural patching in the LTP that we discussed in the last session here. The in-year funding that the leader mentioned at the very top of the meeting gives us the ability to get some real-world data on that very point, on insurance claims, on long-term defects, on what the effect of that additional money actually means. So if I go back to that DFT funding, whatever that long-term pipeline is, we know what works most effectively, and we can consider some of those longer-term infrastructure investments, for example, another place or places to dispose of the waste, over a 10-year view rather than a 1 to 2 year view. So the commitment from officers will be to support recommendations and considerations on that. And if scrutiny are minded to recommend, we'll certainly take that into account.
Yeah. Could you just, Paul, perhaps you could just address the point about landowner enforcement as well, and make any other comments you want to make on those points?
So I think just picking up some of the points that Councillor Dale made, the first one was around the use of this, like the severe weather reserve for tackling things in year, using reserves for that.
I'm sorry, yes. I mean, my view is that when you use reserves, you only use them once, not gone.
Yeah, what I would say in relation to that is that the whole fundamental point of having a severe weather reserve is to use that to deal with those impacts that you have on occasion, and this year has been one of those occasions that we do that. The severe weather reserve's there to tackle, you know, additional snow and
Rain.
bad weather periods during, you know, because they do go cyclical. So that is something that I think is sensible to do that. That's what the fund's there set up for. DFT expect us to do that so that we address those issues, you know, in a timely manner. So that's something that we are set up to do and that we're tackling. In terms of the additional resource, I think the first thing clearly, and what we're trying to demonstrate during the presentation, is that our starting point always is, can we get the best use out of the existing resource that we have, or better use out of the existing resource we have. And certainly there's things that we are doing, and further investigations on that to try and get the best use out of that existing resource. The information we mentioned about alloy and using that carbon tech and looking at how the existing staff and the vehicles are deployed, looking at that investment in an additional disposal point, for example, will improve the productivity and the efficiency of the existing kit. The staffing level is an issue that we are going to be looking at as part of that, because clearly the equipment is very expensive, and making sure that it's on the road and operational for as long as possible and isn't impacted by staffing availability is one of those key things, as well as terms of getting the best bang for your buck out of that significant investment in the equipment we've already had. But clearly when we start talking about, is there anything else over and above that, that is something that we can have a dialogue over with the administration as part of the budget setting process, and that falls then into the wider, what are the priorities of the council, how does this figure in relation to that, but that is something that we are working on.
Can I just ask on that very quickly, when you're looking at the road sweeping and the actual drivers, you know, we've got the road sweepers, so you've got all these, you know, road sweepers, etc., etc. We need to make sure that they're being used and not, you know, having a day off because they're on the gritter or something on this, that and the other. Because I know you can't do gritting on the thing, but there is the dust, there is refuse recycling and everything else. So it's as you said, but it's the whole picture. So all of them across, out of, you know, I know you've got, it's road, it's a different, it's a different service delivered, because David Hunt delivers it in our area. So it's different from the highway, so it's just getting them together.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn just wants to make a point before we move on to the next question, which is...
So the policy thank you. The policy conference this afternoon, which will be officer-led, and there will be very few of the cabinet there, because that's the way I would rather do it. And that will be a perfect opportunity to make the very points that you're making, so that they can then feed into this budget process, which is a genuine attempt to get members' views and how we can actually improve matters.
Great. Thank you. We've got Dan next, then Mark, then Jeff, then Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions regarding the challenges faced and the improvements and next steps, and I've cross-referenced some of them. The first one is about the street parking, which has become an increase due to home workers, which I think cross-references to the gullies being visited on multiple occasions. So my concern is that when they go out on multiple occasions and there's a car that's parked over a gully, do the gully workers actively go and try and work out who the owner of the car is and ask them to move? Because I'm really concerned that they go out, oh, well, there's a car there, we'll come back next week, oh, there's another one there, and so on. So do they actively seek out the residents to move them? And the other question was regarding, in the challenges, the unclear ownership of landowners, of drainage systems. And that crosses to the improvements for the issue and guidance to the landowner. So in terms of when you say unclear ownership, are we saying that there's gullies that we don't know who owns them and who is meant to be managing them?
No, in terms of the unclear ownership, if you the roads, gullies drain the roads, the gullies, the pipework off the gullies then goes into either roadside ditches or other drainage systems, and it's that connection into those other drainage systems where some of those are clearly onto private land. It's then the private landowner's responsibility in terms of that, because the highway is just effectively part of that much bigger system, and it's the condition, the maintenance, even where some of those actual pipework connections go to and the ultimate end points and discharge points of them, a lot of that information we don't have because it's not within our ownership. So where you have issues either upstream or downstream of the things that we connect into, that can be a problem if there's effectively blockages or things that then back up into the highway drainage system. Yeah. Andy, do you want to come in on the cars?
Regarding when the gully wagon goes to specific locations, there's a car parked over gully. Predominantly, the gully wagon will be there maybe 2 or 3 days with on the street. It will try and clear that gully the second day and will knock on a door outside the vicinity. But a lot of the time, the cars are just parked, people in town or 3 or 4 doors down where they actually live. We don't know. We'll initially knock on the door opposite, and if that doesn't work, we now start to look at doing a letter drop further down the line. So, because probably we always get complaints saying we've cleaned 6 gullies on one street, but we've missed 2, and that's where the cars are being parked. So now, future planning, we're not going to go into that street when we know that there's an issue. We're going to actually do a letter drop now for, say, 3 to 4 weeks' time, ask for these cars to be moved between 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock.
Great answers, Chair. Thank you.
That's great. Mark, you were next. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the report. It was an interesting read, but I have to say extremely disappointing. There is nothing in that report that my residents wants to or interested in reading. You know, in the improvement of actions, all we see is review, and that's not seeing impact to the residents that's paying the tax. The documents that we talk about turned up 10 seconds ago after my complaint in the pre-meeting. They were meant to be at us months ago. It's taken since Storm Arwen for this authority to produce a document to explain what landowners' responsibilities are. So we're no further forward than what we were in Storm Arwen. So this document and this scrutiny is not taking the bull by the horns or being productive, sadly. We have no tree and shrub plan because there's been no works undertaken since Storm Arwen, definitely in the north I can see. So what is our tree and shrub plan that's overhanging the highways? How are we going to deal with it? When was the last time we dealt with it? That's been brought up time and time again. And disappointing that the NEAT team didn't come today. Who's going to enforce these guidance documents, as the inspector already has too large of a job role to be expected to do that? On street parking, we need to be communicating better with county councillors and parish councillors. The communication is going backwards at the moment about work that's getting done in wards, definitely within my ward. We're getting told less and less, and we can be a part of the solution, not the problem. The loss of records, we don't know where all the drains are. We don't know where the pipework goes. So it's great that we've got a system now, but it's going to take a lot of work to try and find the details that's been lost over the years due to technology changes. The Fix My Street, you mentioned that the large percentage has had a response, but then you did quietly say that a response isn't actually doing anything. A response is, you know, pre-planned works which could be a year away. We're in the middle of July, and this week again, we had the A697 100% flooded, 100% coverage in flooding to drains that I reported months ago, if not years ago. No response. You've never seen such a level of funding that the leader's provided you. And my concern is that the quality of contractor that we don't seem to have a handle on, we don't seem to be inspecting the quality of work that's getting done is being looked at. And we're talking about additional gully wagons. A lot of the time we just need a spade. We're getting all excited about extra £300,000. The A697 have been looked at for a long time. And I go out with a spade and I clean them myself. It's 2 spadefuls of turf on the top. This report is for the South East. The way it's written, it does not understand rural issues. And the rural communities don't get access to the big time funding that's been spent in places. They just want their basics. They want the statutory requirements done and to a high quality, and they're currently not getting that. I mean, I could go on all day. It's extremely disappointing that 7 years down the lines of disposing all of our liquid in Blythe, that we're going to review the disposal points. 7 years. That's not acceptable. And you've got down £28,000 for the disposal. I presume that's what it costs at the disposal end. That'll not factor in the 2 hours a day for the north and the west tankers to drive to that point to empty its load. And then when we get on about gully tankers, there's no provision in there to provide extra staff to ensure that goes on the road when if somebody's off sick. We had a gully tanker off, was it over 10 weeks in the north last year because it was away for maintenance. There's no provision in there. There's no reaction to hiring an additional wagon. So no wonder we're getting further and further behind because it's just the way the teams are being managed. And I don't think money's going to fix it until the management get a grip of where that money's being spent. And I'll stop there because I could keep going.
But apart from that, everything's fine.
Well, I think I'll just make a comment on that, and then if you could perhaps address some of those problems. I mean, I disagree with Mark in the sense I do think there is a resource issue. Is you need capacity as a team, and I think there are some things we can do to increase the capacity. But if you could just sort of address the other points.
So in terms of covering about verges, hedges and trees, this should be primarily about drainage, and the majority of the issues around trees is around safety of the trees and the encroachment into the actual creating obstruction within the carriageway. So we haven't picked on that as part of this report in that sense. The documentation that...
Chair, can I just point out, we did actually ask for that in this report. We did ask for full... the first one was road surface, and the second report was verge, ditches and trees. And that's something when Councillor Dodd was on this committee, couldn't get an answer to either. Well, so it's been repeatedly asked for.
We've covered drainage because that's what we understood the ask was. If you want us to come and look at verges, maintenance and trees,
let's discuss that when we get to the
more than happy to do
item
that
later on.
Yeah.
I think this was specifically about drainage, but
that's not what we said in the meeting, Chair.
So in terms of that, yes, we do undertake work within the verge, and just to clarify the point that was made, where it's a highway verge, the highway verge is the county council's responsibility. So the cutting of the verge, if there's trees growing in that highway verge, they are the county council's responsibility. A lot of the issues we have, though, are from hedgerow trees, and we're not responsible for the hedges. The hedges that are on either side of the highway, generally, as a rule, are the landowner's responsibility because they're the boundary feature of their land. And trees that are grown within those hedgerows are the landowner's responsibility. And clearly a lot of those trees, grow over the highway. Over time, they can create issues in terms of if of disease, if they've got big limbs that are dropping down within the carriageway that might create an issue for HGVs, for example. That's the role of the highway inspectors to identify and tackle those, and obviously they get complaints and third-party reports as part of that. When they get concerns or reports of that kind of nature, they will make contact with the landowner. They'll look to identify who the landowner is, and they'll notify the landowner of their obligations. The documentation that we've produced just helps to clarify that and to set in place those responsibilities and to more articulately, share that. So that's, hopefully a positive way forward. but fundamentally it doesn't change the fact that it is that landowner's responsibility, and we do have powers to enforce that, and we do, where necessary, do that. We will undertake works in default if they don't respond to the notices that we serve, and we will look to recover the costs of doing that from them. But what I would say is that, you know, given we've got 5,000 kilometres of highways, a lot of those, particularly in rural areas, have got hedgerow trees and verges that have got hedges as the boundary features on them. That is a significant issue for the landowners as well. So we do that, you know, pragmatically and in a responsive way where there's concerns in terms of the safety of the network. In terms of not knowing our own system, we do know where our gullies are. That's the whole purpose of all of that digitisation. What we're not 100% sure on is all of that other associated pipework as part of that bigger catchment, and that will, you know, that will take a long, long time, because some of that, there isn't records of that. You'd have to go and survey that. That isn't unusual. There's a lot of work that the water industry itself is doing in urban areas where they don't even know where their own pipework goes. So we're not unique in that. That's just the nature of things, but it is something that we are conscious of. In terms of the inspecting and making sure contractors do what we want, we don't have eyes and ears across the whole county. We don't have the resource to basically sit on top of people and keep an eye on them when we, you know, doing everything they do. But we do spot checks. We do get warranties from contractors that we do. We do expect as part of that commissioning process that they provide documentary evidence in terms of photographic records and the like of work that they undertake, so that there is that ability to hold them to account, and that is what we certainly always want to do.
And also for any kind of contractor which works on our network within an area now, they're all issued with a tablet, so we know what gets done each day, even that's a pothole, structural patch, or even a gully now.
And in relation to when vehicles, you know, when we have issues with vehicles, and there was an issue when we procured our 4 new gully tankers that the manufacturer didn't quite meet the specification that we had issued, and that they went back and that took a prolonged time to resolve. The vehicles we have are effectively state-of-the-art. If there are issues with them, the teams do hire in. There was an issue, and I accept that there was problems in your area that affected your area, but the team did hire in additional vehicles, and we did retain some of the existing fleet to address that, and that is something that we will continue to do going forward as well.
We did with the issues with the new vehicles, which we did receive throughout the county, they had to go back for modification. So we knew each vehicle had to go down from each area. So we did hire a vehicle in to cover all areas. As the northern area, theirs went and get refitted. That higher vehicle went up north. And when the new vehicle came back, it come down to the western area. When ours went down, the Castle Morpeth and in Blythe. So there was a hired vehicle come in for the areas.
Any other, Mark, anything that you want to raise?
See if I didn't come back, Chair.
Okay. And I think it was Nick next. Oh, sorry, it was indeed. It was Jeff. Big mistake. Nick, could you wait for Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for producing the report, whether some people appreciate it or not. To me, it was well presented, and it's full of facts and things. But as the Vice Chair says, I'm not sure how helpful it is to my residents. Anyway, so I've got a few questions, so I'll rattle them all off, and then you can just come back to me if that's all right. The first couple of things are comments, which is the Fix My Street thing, which is really great, and it is really engaging residents as a two-edged sword, because I get quite a lot of people that say, Jeff, I'm ringing you because I put it on Fix My Street, and all Fix My Street says is it's not a problem, we're not going to do it. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff on there, and people are really bothered about it, but as an organisation, we aren't. It's like when people trip in the street and it's 30 millimetres, that's not enough. They've tripped and they hurt themselves. but that's not enough for the organisation to take any remedial action. And so the Fix My Street thing is fantastic because it tells us a great deal about the state of the environment, but people feel let down that they've gone to the effort of doing that and it hasn't resulted in anything being done as far as they're concerned. And then it was just about the holistic approach, and I think that's what the Vice Chair was talking about, really. You know, we're talking about drains today, but I could quite happily talk about the gutters throughout my division, which are literally 6 inches of grass and weeds, and you know, I don't think there'd been any weed killing this year, as far as I can tell. And I know you're going to tell me it's wet and the weed killer doesn't work when it's wet and all the rest of that. Totally get it. But this is one of the kind of results of climate change. The environment we live in is changing around us, and we aren't adapting quick enough to resolve people's problems. But anyway, so I just wanted to, these are the kind of the questions. Do we rotate the vehicles? So you've got the one in Blythe that's driving around and is doing all of this work, and it's only putting, like, I don't know, I've got no idea about the mileage, but puts 4,000 miles on. And you've got the one in the north that's got 15,000 miles on. Do we actually take the one from the north and give it to the people in Blythe and take the one with 4,000 miles on? And so when it comes to the end of the lease, or however we want to get rid of them, there's a balance across all the vehicles. So one of them hasn't done 20,000 and one of them's done 80,000. Do you see what I mean? So do we do that? And if we don't, why don't we? I've mentioned the weeds. And when you say the disposal of this stuff goes to landfill, could we not send it to the incinerator instead? I mean, it's just presumably 90% of it is organic matter. And if it is organic matter, could we send it off to the composter? And perhaps we should search, I did think perhaps we should search through it and look for lost car keys and try, you know, and see if there's diamond rings and earrings and stuff, to see if there's actually anything in there that's salvageable. But seriously, is sending it to landfill the most effective way, cost-effective way of getting rid of it? You know, because you could. We've got a line in the incinerator in Teesside that takes most of the stuff. Well, there can't be anything. There can't be very much in that thing when it's dry, when all the water's come off it. There can't be very much in there that won't burn. Is what I would say. And I mean, sending organic material to landfill is just, seems to me to be a bit mad. And as far as the climate change aspect of all this, are you thinking that where we are is going to accelerate away? So it is going to get wetter. We are going to need our gullies in better condition. And if that's what you think, what's your plan? You know, when we're building new estates, or you're telling planners that, listen, we need if it's a 6-inch drain pipe at the minute, or you're telling them, well, from now on you need to put 8 inches in. You know, that kind of, are we thinking that holistically? Are we thinking about the consequences of what might in 10 years be? You know, it's like what I'm always saying about trees. Everybody complains in my division about the trees. And it's only now that they're twice as tall as the house and they're dropping leaves and, you know, we need to be thinking now about the decisions we make and the things we build now when we're all gone and they're still there, because some of these gullies will have been there since before the war, presumably. Some of them be even Victorian. So are we thinking, you know, a 6-inch pipe is no longer big enough, for we can't have it draining in just into a ditch? We need, you know what I mean? Are we actually taking a holistic approach and looking at climate change and thinking about the whole thing and build in resilience rather than the firefighting that you appear to be doing now? Thank you.
I think I've got most of those. So in terms of the Fix My Streets and the feedback and picking up the comment that Councillor Miller made earlier as well, we have addressed the majority of the issues. When I made reference to some of those that are closed, they're closed because there's work programmed rather than the actual work having been undertaken. That's part of the feedback and the improvements we're looking to make as part of the ongoing evolution of that system. But I think the important point on that is that previously there was no feedback. It went into a void and you never heard anything. So you're able to track it and you can see that. The reason why we don't just jump out and go and sort an individual gully, and rather than saying it's part of, it's programmed for work, so that's now closed and it's closed off, is because we want that to be part of that cyclic maintenance activity, because that's a far better effective use of the resource. And if we know we're going to be in that location within the next week or so, it's far more sensible to say, okay, that's case done. We know it's going to get sorted within the next however many days. That's sorted. So that's why, that's what was meant when I referenced the work closed, but the work actually not physically done at that point in time.
The point therefore is that you need therefore that little box that you send back to the complainant. You need to be more specific in there that, yes, we understand the problem, we know what it is, and actually it's going to be, you know, the kind of generic stuff.
Yeah.
It's just the expectation of people against the performance of the organisation, which is the difficult bit.
And I wholeheartedly agree with what you've just said, and that's something that we are constantly improving as part of that Fix My Streets process. Those reports now will and should be saying this is now programmed for work to be undertaken. And ideally, when all the teams have got those in-cab systems and they've got the tablets, when the ideal position we want to get to is that once that work is physically done, it's then clicked on the tablet, feeds back to the system, and you get that instant feedback. That's the ideal. We've got that on some aspects of the service, but not all, and that's an ongoing process. But we are constantly looking at that feedback to make sure that we are getting some of that, well, you've not done it, and you're getting a duplicate because you've not done it, you've said you've done it, but I've not done it. To tackle that, to, if we can, tweak the wording to make that clearer in terms of what is actually getting done. And obviously the feedback we get on that is really helpful, and that's something that will continue. In terms of we don't consider that to be a problem aspect of it when people report things that doesn't meet, our classification for is it a defect, is it meet an intervention level. I think the key thing on that is that we went through a very detailed process through the TAMP, through the Transport Asset Management Plan, that set out what are the kind of intervention criterias that we work to, what are the service standards that we work to, and the response times. That's gone through that whole process of consultation and through scrutiny and all the rest of it. All local authorities do that because fundamentally you have to have a consistency across the piece. You have to have those set standards and those set time frames, and what are the things that you will respond to and what are the things that you won't respond to, because ultimately it's a risk-based approach. You have to manage the risks appropriately. We've got a finite resource. We need to make best use of that resource. And we also need to be able to, where people do make claims against us because they've sadly hurt themselves, if that isn't something that meets those criteria and it's just an unfortunate issue, we have to rely on our statutory defence to protect the public purse. So for all of those reasons, we're not going to go out and fix everything just because people want us to fix everything, because we just can't do that, and that wouldn't be appropriate use of public funds to do that. In terms of channels and weeds and channels, and is weed killing not getting done this year. Weed killing is getting done this year, as it's getting done every year. Weeds are always a really big challenge for local authorities because of the constraints around the types of weed kill you can use now that are contact and all the rest of it. You've heard all of the dialogue previously. What I would say is that those concerns have been raised, through the administration. We've responded to that in terms of additional overtime work being undertaken to put more resource to that. And the administration has also put additional funding in this year in recognition that, there's a view from good selves that is more of a problem to get on top of that faster. So that is something that we've got additional teams working on and staff working longer hours on at the moment to make more of a visible impact on the weed growth that is out there at this point in time. In terms of do we move vehicles around? On occasion, yes, but not as a norm. The balancing of the vehicle, as I mentioned in the presentation, the vehicles in the urban areas have got a 50-50 tanker, not a 60-40 tanker. That's purposeful, and that's because we need them to carry, the rule wants to carry more waste before they come back to the disposal point. So that they're not set up as effective to be as effective when they do that. And whilst the mileage might be higher in those rural areas, some of the other wear and tear on the vehicle is much more intense in the urban areas as well. If you think that they're tipping off a lot more, they're doing 300 and odd rather than 150, so they get another wear and tear on the vehicle. So in terms of depreciation and maintenance, it kind of balances itself out in that sense anyway. On a similar basis, we don't switch all the refuse collection vehicles around in urban rural areas. They're in a location, they tend to just stay in that location because we want teams to take ownership of the vehicles as well and look after them. So we don't do that. In terms of the actual disposal of the material, the material that comes out of gully tankers, we used to put onto composting facilities. We used to put the street cleansing mechanical sweeper waste into some of the composting facilities. There was research done by the Environment Agency that I think predominantly looked at some of the more urban settlements. They actually found that there was quite high levels of heavy metals and things such as that. Certainly lots of plastics and basically wear and tear materials that come off vehicles, hydrocarbons and oils and things such as that were ending up both in the detritus in the channels as well as actually in the gullies themselves. So the material in gullies in particular, as well as that street cleansing kind of residue, is effectively waste that needs to be disposed of because it's got those other trace issues that make it a little bit more difficult to deal with. It's not suitable for composting for all those reasons because it doesn't meet the organic standards that you have to reach for composting. If we put it through an energy from waste plant, whilst there's an organic element to it, it's still very wet and it's predominantly inert materials. So landfill is the most appropriate option at this point in time, but we are aware and conscious that some other local authorities do work with quarry operators. They do effectively filter that material and grade that material because it is predominantly like sands and grits and gravels is a large volume of it. So they do actually pull that out and they can use that as part of just, again, road making or construction type materials as part of the processing. So that's one of the benefits of looking at tying into some of the disposal arrangements that are already within quarry facilities to link into that. In terms of how we're dealing with things in a more holistic sense longer term, there's a whole raft of legislation coming forward in terms of sustainable urban drainage systems and additional obligations and powers on local authorities associated with that. Certainly even at this point in time, as part of the planning process, any new developments through the flood and coastal erosion team and the local their flood risk role, you've got permeable surfaces rather than impermeable surfaces. You want to basically get as much water just percolating through into the ground and being slowed down and captured within the ground, the natural surfaces, green surfaces in effect as possible. And any of the hard surfacing has to drain into properly designed urban drainage systems that have attenuation, that have those drainage systems that slow the water down, make sure it's clean when it comes out of the end pipe and into the systems as well. So that is something that is already happening and is getting increasingly important in terms of from both the planning as well as a highway design and maintenance aspect, and it's something nationally that's taking place.
Thank you. Nick.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the report. There's some interesting stuff in it. It's good to hear that there'll be a review of gully water disposal, and interesting to read that it might involve reed beds. And it'd be great if you could keep me and hopefully perhaps the whole committee up to speed on that. I was interested to hear that there's going to be engagement with volunteers and town and parish councils, and hopefully they'll be doing some low-level gully checking and maintenance. And again, I'd like to be kept up to speed on that as well, please. Most of my questions have been answered. I've just got 3 quick ones. I've got a 4th question for Glenn as well. So one is, you mentioned sweeping of footways. And I've never quite been clear on this, but are all footways swept, including rural footways and the footways in rural villages? I was just hoping you could just clarify that. Also, you mentioned drainage, highways drainage that sometimes goes into the combined sewer system. And I didn't realise that it did that, and I'm just wondering if you can tell me how often that happens. And the 3rd question for the officers was about the page of the report called Manager Reports Issued to Monitor. There's like a chart at the bottom, or a list of issues at the bottom. It looks like on May the 5th last year, flooding of a private property was reported, and it took almost 5 days for us to respond to it. And on May the 18th, again, flooding of a private property reported, and it took over 4 months to respond. Did it really, or is that just a sort of a kind of an error in the list? And then the question for Glenn was, I was really interested when you said that we're lobbied by cyclists who don't like wildflowers encroaching on the road. And this is a really genuine question, because as a cyclist, I'm not bothered. I know that a lot of road users are worried about line of sight. As a cyclist, I never am, and I think it's because my eye level is slightly higher than the eye level of a typical car driver. Do you really find that more cyclists are worried about wildflowers and line of sight than motorists?
Shall I take my question first and then pass it on? So my question, so yes is the answer. When we've had the kind of weather that we've had with heavy rain, and the cowslips are at full height, and they come over into the road and encroach by as much as that much. If you're talking about a C road or a U road, then cyclists have complained to me that they've had to weave round those, and they've put their lives in danger. And we wouldn't want anything to happen to cyclists.
Paul, do you want
Glenn's laughing because I'm a keen cyclist. So I think the key point there is that the verge maintenance is important in terms of basically the safety of highway users, be it cyclists, vehicle drivers, horse riders, pedestrians walking in the highway. If you allow the verges to get overgrown and effectively they start hanging over into the highway, particularly around junctions where it affects vision splays, but also just on your general highway network. If you're having to drive down the centre line of a road because it's that overgrown on the sides, that's not clever, because you come around a bend and you've got a head-on vehicle collision potentially. So that's something that you have to tackle that issue as a highway safety issue. As we already heard, there are locations where we recognise there's ecologically important verges, and we work with the National Park and Natural England and other bodies and town and parish councils on that, and we do designate and we basically demarcate them, and we allow the local community to manage and maintain those elements of the network with our consent. So there's different approaches to it, but fundamentally we have to ensure that there's a safety aspect. Yeah.
Sorry, look, I just want to come back on that very seriously. That's it as well. See say you've got a grass verge so wide. You're cutting the whole grass verge. You can just surely cut a little bit
Is it not a
going down.
We generally cut 1.2 metres back from the edge of the carriageway. Certainly on all of the rural roads, that's effectively the standard. There are some of the urban areas where the verge effectively extends then onto public open space, and as part of the wider management of that public open space, just for the visual amenity aspect, there will be cutting that on an amenity basis that gets a much higher frequency than the verge cutting. So that may be the areas that you're thinking about that you would prefer a different approach to. What I would say, Councillor Carty, in relation to that is that we are looking as part of the BEST programme at our verge, grounds maintenance, got their name, grounds maintenance arrangements to look at that, the rebalancing some of that in terms of biodiversity, but also being really conscious that we also have to make sure that the visual amenity and the areas look well maintained and kept as part of that. So there's a balance to be struck. We're not saying we've got it right at the moment. There needs to be some further dialogue and a bit more of a nuanced approach to that, and to work with local communities and stakeholders around what that nuanced approach should look like in that local area.
And I'm really glad this has come up. It's not strictly speaking on the agenda, I'm sorry, but I think it's really important because I've already had discussions with the head of neighbourhood services about why do we have to go as wide as we go. And secondly, timing. I think we sometimes, when are we due to start? Beginning of June or something? Is it something like that, Andy? And trying. I would really like to see, the big white cowslips come to seed, and then decide what to do. So there's this balance, but I would like us to be a little bit later and cut a little bit less. So we are having that discussion. The other problem is that we have a lot of cleavers in everywhere, as you know, and they've taken over these what do they call sticky willies? Is it? No, it's not. No, it's not. It is. That's what they're called. You told me that. Blame Paul. But you end up with a lot of pernicious weeds taking over the verges, so it's managing that balance. But we are wanting to, I would like to see less cut later.
I think just coming back to some of the points you raised, but just kind of finalising on that one, the other key thing you have to remember, as well as in part of that verge maintenance activity, is that where the verge is much deeper than just the 1.2 metre cut that we undertake as standard, ideally what we should be doing, and do in some locations, is basically clear back the whole verge to the boundary feature, the hedge line, at least on a 5-year kind of cycle, because what you don't want is self-seeding trees growing that close to the edge of the highway that then become an issue in terms of the maintenance of the network going forward. So there are other things that you have to take into account as part of that maintenance regime as well. In terms of the issues around footpaths, do all footpaths get swept? No, they don't. We just don't have the resource to do that. So the majority of the mechanical sweeping activity is in the kind of the higher footfall kind of area. So it's in town centres, it's on popular priority routes and locations such as that, and village centres as well.
So not in rural villages?
I'm not saying not in rural villages, because we do mechanical sweeping in rural villages as part of the programme, but in terms of do all residential pavements and footways get swept? No, they don't. We don't go across the whole county doing that. We don't have the level of resource to be able to do that. In terms of the why did it take forever and a day to get to some of the block ones? I'd need to check the detail of those. Certainly where we get reports of flooding coming through to properties, that is given as a priority treatment during severe weather events. We will go and we'll, as part of that severe weather response, we'll work with our colleagues in the Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service, because property protection is, a key part of that activity. So we will go and deploy sandbags. We will go and send a gully tanker out to try and remove standing water if it's going to cause a risk to property, and we can actually manage that risk through that activity. So that's effectively like a joint team effort during those severe weather events. We prioritise where that resource can be best deployed to protect the public and to protect highway users.
And that might be just as simple as after the 200 requests.
And the other question was about how often highways drainage goes into combined sewage systems.
So there's a lot. I couldn't tell you the exact number off the top of my head, but there's clearly in urban areas the majority of the drainage systems will drain into combined sewer. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions and then one more question from Andale, then we'll draw it to a close. The resources we've already got and are clearly not fully utilised. So they're off the road when we've got sickness. They're off the road when we're doing ad hoc work, and they're off the road when they're being emptied. So all of those things have sort of been discussed. But is there something that we can do on the point about the sort of ad hoc work, where you've got which also sort of touches upon the point around cars parked and stuff like that. You've got big gully wagon travelling large areas particularly in the north and the west, and if it has to come back to a car parked on St Helens Street in Corbridge because it's just a waste of resource. Is there another solution that we could consider for just dealing with those one-off and trying to address some of the ad hoc work that means that the cyclical work that the big wagons are doing, that they're very efficient at doing, can spend more time on the road?
In terms of some of that ad hoc work where you get those reports, I think what has been happening increasingly is rather than sending the gully tank out to address those, is that the general highway revenue maintenance teams will go out, because some of that, as you rightly said, is because there's just detritus basically covering the top of the gully. It doesn't need a gully tanker to clear that. It can just be other issues that are causing the problem. So, you know, if as part of the inspection process, if they identify that it's not a gully tanker that needs to be addressed as part of that process, they'll send in an alternative resource to do that, just to again maximise the benefit and the productivity of that very expensive resource that we do have.
And then so final question from me is about sort of highway inspection capacity. In terms of, I mean, I know this is potentially points and challenges, because if you're doing more inspection, you've got more work to do. But I guess if you're not doing inspection in a timely manner, then the work builds up and causes more of a problem. So you get more block gullies and more damage to roads. So can you just sort of comment on that?
So we have a team of highway inspectors that their duties are, and they have set frequencies by which they have to inspect both driven and walked inspections of effectively the highway network. And that's all documented in our transport asset management plan as to what those frequencies are. One of the things that we are looking at is through the Council's BEST strategic transformation programme is looking at a rapid service improvement review for the highway service. That's already effectively been undertaken in terms of the dialogue with the staff and the workshops with the staff to understand what are the kind of frustrations they feel, what are the issues that they would like support with that would help them to be more effective and efficient in their duties. That is something that, you know, we're working through. The number of highway inspectors and their range of work is something that has been identified as one of the issues within that, and the outcomes of that will be getting reported through, and the options around that will be getting reported through the Council's governance arrangements around BEST as part of that process.
Because it's specifically related to the things we're talking about today, could we see the recommendations of that review at this committee?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Final question from Councillor Dale, and then we'll sort of come on to recommendations.
Just mentioned that cyclists, one thing cyclists don't like is puddles being plotted. And there are these activities that we're going to hospitals and that. Can I just go back to the verges? It's the ditches and the ditches, trees and the verges. I haven't got a copy of the report that's in here, but I do know, because I remember it from 2016 because we worked on it. But it's the council's responsibility to the landowners too. So if I said, and this is one thing about the verges, is we've got verges near us, which are, they're not meant to be, they're environmental ones, and they're not cut, right? What they have got, though, is hogweed in and thistles in. An enormous amount of weeds. And they, unfortunately, blow over into the landowner's field. So you have thistles. They then have problems with, hey, whatever they're cutting is thistles. So it's two-way. It has to be a two-way understanding. That, you know, if you're going to ask the landowners to be responsible for their drainage, then the council has to be responsible also. I also know of and have 3 standing things about the council and causing flooding in farmers' fields. And because it's all drainage things. So there has to be maybe something working together where people can actually not highlight it all over the place, but have a word where they can contact somebody and say, we have got problems. It has to be sorted, and probably a joint problem, but it needs to be resolved. But I think when we're looking at the document, which I'd like to see, obviously, to see that we have a promise to the landowners that we will manage our land, our responsibilities as well. Does that make sense?
It does, and there's copies of the documentation here
that
we'll dish out at the end, but it does set out in terms of the drainage aspects what the county council's obligations are. And obviously, as a landowner, if we're going to a landowner to say, you haven't done that and we haven't done our bit, they'll be more than entitled to complain to us regarding that. One of the key kind of principles around, and it's, you know, it's enshrined both in common law as well as in the legislation, is that you can't just pass flooding issues onto other property, yeah? And likewise, we wouldn't expect landowners to cause problems that basically passed a flood issue onto the highway. Similarly, we wouldn't pass a flood risk from the highway onto the land adjoining that. It has to be a joint and sensible approach to that.
I think the legal part is the discussion about ditches, which side of the fence, where they are and everything else. If we can have it, not now, obviously, but I wouldn't mind some definitely.
There's a really helpful diagram in the documentation that outlines what the obligations are around that.
Great, thank you very much. So kind of now is the most important bit of this, because the scrutiny is pointless unless it comes up with some recommendations. I'm just going to throw a couple of things out there and we can have a quick discussion, and if anybody's got any other ideas. Personally, from what I've read and what I've heard today and what I know is happening on the ground, I think this is an area, the 2 areas that need sort of serious consideration of additional resources. One is extra capacity for gully cleansing, and the other is extra capacity for road sweeping. And my gut feel, and it's only gut feel, I'm no expert, is that if you did spend a little bit more on those things, then you would probably spend a lot less on sort of maintenance and repairing damage. So I'd like to see a recommendation that asks the Cabinet to consider increasing the capacity of gully cleansing, probably by, I mean, ultimately we're not the experts, it's going to be down to the guys here to decide what the best way to do it is. But whether it's a question of training more staff so you can keep the vehicles on the road for longer, whether it's a question of actually having a couple more vehicles, whether it's a question of having something that means that none of those vehicles are used ever for ad hoc work, and that you can use a different solution all the time, and whether it's a question of actually increasing the waste disposal options so that the vehicles don't need to travel as far to be emptied. But I think all of those things should be considered by the Cabinet as part of the budget setting process, and then that we can come back you know, with some ideas about what can and can't be done, and then hopefully we'll see some improvements. I'll come to you in a second.
Yeah,
I'd also like to see I'd quite like to see some logging of landowner enforcement, so we know, because I'm guessing there'll be some landowners that are incredibly they're just telling us we've been going for 2 hours and we need to finish soon. There'll be some landowners that are incredibly diligent, and there'll be other landowners that couldn't care less. And I imagine some of the perennial problems will be with there'll be a sort of Pareto effect, I imagine. And I think that would be another recommendation I would like to suggest. Mark, I think you had one that was related to...
Yeah, Chair, it was just a recommendation that we ask the leader to contact all new MPs and ask them for the support to honour the promised 184 million income to the highways maintenance, if that was possible.
Yeah, and then I mean, so that and some of that money could possibly be used into sort of revenue funding. If it's a 10-year thing, then you've got 10 years of revenue funding. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, can I just add on to that one? I think we want to ask them to include CPI or RPI. We don't want that amount of funding because by then the cost of everything will have gone up like that. So we want to add the value in. So if it's a clever exercise, but you need to do it. So it's easy to say we'll have so much, but actually by the time everything's gone up over that period of time, then you should add that in too. Anybody would do that, I would think. So I think to do that, we should make sure that we've put our foot down and said not just that. We want actual the cost CPI per annum added in, or RPI, whichever it is, whether it's bitumen or whatever. But that should be included. Otherwise, it doesn't become such a lot. The other, can I just ask that we also look at areas where there is risk, an important risk of flooding, because I think what we need to know across the council where the high-level risks of flooding are, and that could be on roads for obviously the infrastructure, the A roads or the B roads, housing, and I think we need to understand where those risks are, and because I think that would help. For instance, there are going to be risks all over, but basically if it's going to cause risk to life, if it's going to cause a risk to the working the roads and everything else, and also risk to housing, and I think that should be put down so we understand actually what we're managing on top. And I don't know whether you've got that in place, but I think it's important that we do. Are you agree with that? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably, I mean, my understanding, and I was on the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee for 4 years, is that the flood risk across the county is pretty well mapped already, and all of the flood incidents are recorded.
It's not.
Anything that gets reported, I think, gets logged, and it is. And certainly when I've had recent experience with flooding, and it's changing, obviously, there are new areas, but the flood team, with the FCERM team, do have quite sophisticated modelling tools as well, and they can do, but maybe...
Can I just say, I've been going through this for the last 6 years with them, and they're very good. What we need to know is everybody understands the areas where there is, and unfortunately there are more areas opening up, and that's the problem in itself.
So maybe just a note explaining how that is all logged and what, and then we can decide whether it's adequate. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Dan, did you have a?
Yeah. Sorry, I need to shoot off for work, so it's just a very quick one. If we are going to involve more volunteer groups in helping out, as in the report, then I think it's only fair, and my recommendation would be, is that the council look to provide the tools and funding necessary for these community groups to be able to do that. Because there are, as we know, there's areas in Northumberland where there are volunteer groups who like to try and make the environment a lot better. But if in terms of gully cleaning, I don't know what sort of tools they would need. Street cleaning signs, we know what they need for that, but gully cleansing, I really don't know. So if there's some sort of recommendation that could be included for that to assist volunteer groups, if that is something the council are looking to do, because I would be more than happy to be supporting that and do it myself. Thank you.
Yeah. So just for clarity, we're not talking about them cleaning the internals of gullies, it is literally just a shovel.
Yeah. We'll buy you a shovel and a pair of wellies, Dan. What size feet are you? Yeah. Are there any other recommendations? No, are we happy with those then? So I think that they're sort of quite clear, aren't they? And in terms of, and then obviously we'll make the same point this afternoon at the budget consultation.
On the recommendation to write to all the MPs, I actually have already written to them about welcoming them and asking, I hope we'll be able to meet up soon. I also wrote to the Prime Minister, laid out about 13 points. One of those was around roads, budgets, the A1 specifically and so on, but by roads. However, I will definitely, if you make that a recommendation, I'll do a second letter to the new MPs.
And yeah, no, it's fine. Okay, no, that's fine. We're finishing very shortly, but go ahead. Just on the preventative maintenance side of things, I think what we hopefully that's clear. But I think in a sense, what we need is some sort of response back, and that doesn't need to be committed to now in terms of how that might come back. But I think there's a budget process that will be running between kind of now and the end of the year. I would have thought by the latest point should be, into sort of December, we should have some sort of response, even if it's just a written response to the members of the committee on what has been possible and what has been agreed, so that we can, because this scrutiny process it's not the end of the process, it's the start of the process, right. And so can we make that sort of quite clear in the minutes? Yeah, thank you. And then I think, yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure we're still core at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we are. Three. Well, we've only got, literally, we'll be about another 60 seconds, I imagine. I think we've got the next item is item 5, which is the monitoring report. Sean, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just a couple of additions to the work programme that's been long-standing issues to be timetabled. In October, we'll have the Green and Open Spaces Review, which was identified last year, and in January, the Local Nature Recovery Strategy should be coming to committee.
Okay. And we're also having some discussions around museums as well, aren't we? Which we'll report back to shortly. And then I think Mark had a suggestion as well.
Yeah, Chair, just with it not being in today's report, can we request the Highways to re-attend the committee, and so that we can see the tree, shrub, scores, what is going to be our plan and policy, and how we're going to actually achieve that, and what works we're doing.
And just to be clear on that, because there's sort of a couple of elements. There's a sort of ash dieback and disease element, isn't there? But there's also just general preventative maintenance.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, yeah, okay. Good. Nick?
Thank you. I noticed that we've got a scrutiny meeting on the 26th of March, which is the same day as a full council meeting, I think. And that seems unusual. It's not a problem, but is it going to be that way?
There have been some changes.
Yeah.
I have updated the work programme, but not on the published version. But yeah, the last meeting of the committee is actually the 2nd of April. So that March meeting will be pulled back a week. And because normally you would meet on the 30th of April, that would be the day before the election. And I'm not really sure many members will be wanting to come in on that day. So yes, the March meeting will be the 2nd of April, and then that will be the last meeting of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So, Chair, can we just... It is going to be 2 o'clock, though, isn't it? This kills me coming at 2.
Yes. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And I'm not aware of any urgent business, so I think I'll formally close the meeting. Thank you to everybody, and thank you to the officers for a very thorough presentation.